Story 1. When Jake moved into his new Victorian-style home, he was eager for a fresh start. The house was old but charming, with creaky wooden floors and ornate wallpaper that gave it character. The first night, as he lay in bed, he noticed a single spider dangling from the ceiling. Without thinking, he grabbed a book and crushed it against the wall. The next morning, he saw 2 more in the same spot. Annoyed, he killed them, but by the end of the week, the pattern had become disturbing. Every time he killed a spider, 2 more appeared. He sprayed pesticides, sealed gaps, and even called an exterminator, but no matter what he did, they kept coming. The walls seemed to hold an endless supply, their tiny black bodies slipping from cracks and crevices, watching him with their unmoving eyes. One night, as he lay in bed, he noticed something unsettling. The wallpaper was moving, not from a breeze, but from within. The patterns twisted and bulged as if something was crawling beneath the surface. He held his breath, pressing his ear to the wall. A soft rustling sound filled the silence, like thousands of tiny legs dragging against wood. His stomach twisted as he reached out and pulled at the peeling wallpaper. As it tore away, he froze. The wall beneath wasn't wood or plaster, it was something else. A pulsing, veined surface covered in a web-like membrane. Beneath it, something shifted. Something alive. He stumbled back, but the moment of hesitation cost him. Cracks splintered across the walls, widening into gaping holes. Then the spiders poured out. Hundreds, then thousands, their spindly legs skittering in every direction, crawling up his arms, into his hair, under his clothes. He tried to scream, but his mouth was filled with silk, the taste bitter and wrong. He turned toward the door, but the handle was coated in writhing black legs, twisting and curling as if mocking him. Then he heard it, a whisper, low and amused, coming from all around him. "You can't kill us. We are the house." The walls shuddered, and the air grew thick with the sound of rustling legs. Jake clawed at the spiders, at the silk binding his limbs, but it was useless. The house exhaled, the walls convulsed, and in an instant, everything went still. Days passed. The house stood quiet and undisturbed, the for sale sign swaying in the breeze. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. Inside, the walls had smoothed over, their veined surface hidden beneath fresh wallpaper. The only sign of Jake's presence was the faintest whisper in the silence, lost beneath the sound of something skittering in the walls. And when the next homeowner arrived, marveling at the house's charm, they barely noticed the single spider crawling along the floor. Without thinking, they crushed it beneath their shoe. The walls exhaled. And somewhere deep inside, Jake smiled. Story 2. The Babysitter's Calls. Sarah checked the time, 11:47 p.m. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the television playing an old horror movie in the background. She was curled up on the couch, home alone for the night, when the phone rang. She hesitated before answering. "Have you checked on the children?" A distorted voice whispered through the line. Her stomach twisted. "Wrong number," she muttered, hanging up. But the phone rang again almost instantly. "Have you checked on the children?" The same voice, the same eerie tone. Her breath caught. "I'm not babysitting tonight," she said, her voice unsteady. Silence. Then, a slow, ragged breath on the other end. Click. The call ended. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to shake it off. It had to be a prank. She double-checked the locks, turned off the TV, and made her way to bed, but the unease lingered. Just as her eyes started to close, ring. Her body tensed. The phone screen glowed beside her. No caller ID. Heart hammering, she answered. "Have you checked on the children?" The voice was quieter this time, almost playful. She gripped the blankets, her throat dry. "Who is this?" she demanded, but the only response was breathing. She reached for the lamp, fingers fumbling over the switch. Thump. A sound. Inside the house. Her pulse spiked. The line was still open, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. "Sarah," the voice rasped. Her blood ran cold. They knew her name. "I see you." The closet door behind her creaked open. Slowly. Her phone slipped from her grasp as she turned her head, her breath shallow. The room was still, the door barely ajar, but she swore she felt something watching her. Heart pounding, she forced herself to stand, inching toward the closet. She reached for the handle, hesitating just before yanking it open. Nothing. Just clothes. Shoes. Silence. She let out a shaky breath, laughing at herself. But then, ring. Her phone, face down on the bed, vibrated again. Her stomach nodded as she picked it up. No caller ID. The moment she answered, a quiet chuckle came through, then the voice whispered, "You shouldn't have looked." A chill crawled up her spine. Something wasn't right. Slowly, she turned back toward the closet. A shadow lingered, darker than it should have been, pressed against the back wall. It hadn't been there before. As her eyes adjusted, the shape shifted, a figure, barely visible in the dim light. Her phone screen flickered, casting brief flashes of light across the room. The call ended, and in the silence that followed, the closet door began to open wider.
I never believed the stories about the school toilets. To me, they were just urban legends meant to scare younger kids. Tales of students hearing whispers, seeing shadows, and, the most famous of them all, watching a broom sweep the floors on its own. Ridiculous, right? At least that's what I thought. Until it happened to me. West Hill Primary School had always been an old building with a history shrouded in mystery. Teachers never liked to talk about the past, but students? They had their own theories. The most chilling one was about a janitor who once worked there. His name was Mr. Harris, a quiet, middle-aged man who never really spoke to anyone except to mutter complaints under his breath. He spent most of his time in the boys' toilets, cleaning and muttering. Then one day he vanished. No one knew where he had gone, and soon after, strange things began happening in those toilets. Some claimed he was murdered and his body hidden somewhere in the school. Others whispered that he never truly left, that his spirit still lingered, doing the only thing he knew, cleaning. But the part that scared everyone the most? Some students who entered the toilets never came back. At first, I dismissed these stories as childish nonsense. But then, I found out the truth for myself. It was a normal school day, or at least it started that way. I was in class when I felt a sharp cramp in my stomach. I needed to use the bathroom. The thing is, our school had multiple bathrooms, but for some reason, everyone avoided the one near the back of the building. That haunted one. I didn't care, I just needed to go. The moment I stepped inside, I regretted it. The air was thick, almost suffocating. A sickly, damp smell lingered in the room like mold and something rotting. The fluorescent lights above flickered violently. I rushed into a stall and locked the door behind me. I barely sat down before I heard it, the slow, rhythmic swish of a broom against the floor. I froze. My heart pounded. "Hello?" My voice came out weak, barely above a whisper. No response. The sweeping sound continued, methodical and steady. Then, a faint scratching noise joined it, like nails dragging across the tiled walls. I held my breath. Something wasn't right. I slowly peered under the stall door, expecting to see shoes. But there were none. Just the broom moving on its own. I yelped, stumbling backward, nearly falling into the toilet. My breathing turned ragged. The sweeping stopped. Then the whispering began. At first, it was unintelligible, a soft murmur swirling around me. Then it became clearer. "Get out, get out, get out before it sees you." I didn't need to be told twice. I yanked open the stall door and sprinted toward the exit. But just as I reached for the door handle, bang! The stall doors behind me all slammed shut at once. I shrieked, my fingers fumbling with the lock. The whispers grew louder, turning into angry, incoherent screams. Then the worst part. The mirror above the sinks fogged up, and right in front of my eyes, words appeared as if written by an unseen hand. "You're next." I screamed and burst through the door, running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached my classroom. My teacher scolded me for barging in, but I barely heard her. My classmates stared at me with wide eyes. They knew where I had been. And now, I understood why no one ever went there. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but things only got worse. Over the next few weeks, students started disappearing. It wasn't sudden. At first they just seemed different, distant. They'd stare blankly, muttering under their breath. Then one by one they stopped showing up to school altogether. Rumors spread. Some said they had been taken by Mr. Harris, forced to clean the toilets for eternity. Others believed their bodies were still inside the school, hidden somewhere no one would ever find them. One night, I decided to test a theory. I snuck into the school after dark, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The halls were eerily quiet, the air thick with something I couldn't explain. As I approached the bathroom, my breath hitched. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as it moved. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside. The broom was there, moving slowly across the floor. But this time, there was something else. A shadow. Tall, thin, standing in the corner. watching me. Woke up, I wasn't in the bathroom anymore. I was somewhere much worse. A small, dark room. The walls were lined with old janitor's equipment. Buckets, mops, cleaning rags. The smell of mildew filled the air. A single light flickered above, casting long, shifting shadows. Then I saw them. The missing students. Their faces were blank, eyes hollow, staring at me like lifeless dolls. They stood motionless, except for their hands, which clutched brooms and mops, moving back and forth in a slow, mechanical motion. A raspy voice filled the room. "You ignored the warnings. Now you belong to me." The shadow stepped forward, revealing itself, a grotesque, twisted figure wearing a janitor's uniform, but its face was wrong. Too long, too distorted, with eyes sunken deep into black pits. "Time to clean," it repeated. I screamed as the students turned toward me, their movements jerky and unnatural, stepping closer and closer. But just as the cold hands gripped me, my mind snapped back. I remembered something, an old ventilation grate I had seen when I first woke up. With all my strength, I kicked at it, the rusted metal giving way. Without thinking, I crawled through, the sounds of furious whispers and scraping brooms echoing behind me. I don't know how long I crawled, but eventually I emerged, back in the school hallway. The air felt fresh, real. I stumbled out of the school and never looked back. The next day the school shut down. No explanation. But soon an official investigation was launched. What they found was far worse than anything we had imagined. In a hidden room beneath the old janitor's closet, they uncovered a gruesome sight, remains of several bodies. Among them was an elderly man believed to be Mr. Harris. But what was even more horrifying were the skeletal remains of young boys, their uniforms still recognizable. No one could explain how they got there or why the janitor had died with them. The school was demolished soon after, and the case was quietly closed. But I know the truth. Mr. Harris never left, and neither did they.